At dawn on March 3, 1943, the sea north of New Guinea appeared calm enough to promise another routine passage. 8 Japanese transports moved in disciplined formation, screened by 8 destroyers, their decks crowded with men and cargo bound for Leh. For the officers watching from the bridges, experience said this run would succeed. For more than a year, Japanese convoys had crossed these waters and lived. What none of them could know was that the war in the air above the Bismarck Sea had quietly changed. American mechanics had taken a medium bomber designed for altitude and accuracy and turned it into something else entirely. In less than 15 minutes, that change would erase an entire convoy and rewrite the rules of naval warfare in the Pacific. By early 1943, the Pacific War was still a contest of reach and supply. Japan's empire stretched across thousands of miles of ocean, and its armies survived only if ships could deliver food, fuel, ammunition, and men. Allied naval strength in the Southwest Pacific was thin. Surface fleets could not challenge every convoy. Air power had to do the work, but it was failing. High-altitude bombing demanded straight and level flight and relied on precision that rarely existed against moving ships. Bombs fell wide. Convoys pressed on. Japanese confidence grew from repeated success, reinforced by a doctrine that assumed aircraft would attack from above or in predictable torpedo runs. For the Allies under General Douglas MacArthur, this imbalance was dangerous. Japanese garrisons in New Guinea were being reinforced faster than they could be dislodged. If shipping could not be stopped, the land campaign would fail. The solution would not come from a new factory design or a committee in Washington. It would come from the field, from mechanics and crews forced to solve a problem doctrine had not prepared them to face. The man at the center of that change was Paul Irving Gunn, known to everyone as Pappy. He was not a theorist. He was a mechanic and pilot, shaped by 2 decades of naval aviation. When war reached the Philippines in 1941, his family was interned and his civilian life destroyed. He escaped to Australia and went to work for the Army Air Forces with a single obsession: find a way to kill ships. Gunn understood what the data already showed. Bombing from 20,000 feet did not work. Torpedoes required specialized training and left aircraft exposed during long, straight runs. If ships were to be sunk from the air, the attack had to be delivered at mast height, where evasion was impossible and every second counted. His answer was to turn a bomber into a gun platform and force the engagement into a range where aircraft firepower could dominate. The aircraft chosen for this role mattered. Fighters carried guns, but lacked range, ammunition capacity, and stability over long distances of ocean. Light attack aircraft could strafe, but could not bring enough bombs to finish the job. The North American B25 Mitchell occupied the middle ground. It had twin engines for reliability over water, a wide and stable fuselage, a nose structure that could be modified, and the internal volume to carry both ammunition and bombs. It could fly low without becoming uncontrollable, and fast enough to outrun much of the defensive fire it faced. It was not designed to be a gunship, but it could be made into one. The crews who flew these aircraft were not abstract innovators. They were men who had watched convoys escape and friends die. Flying at wave-top height meant staring directly into muzzle flashes. It meant holding a steady course while tracer rounds reached for the cockpit. Guns' modifications did not make their missions safer. They made them effective. On the other side were sailors and soldiers packed into transports, many of them bound for their first combat. Japanese training emphasized discipline and endurance, not the terror of sudden annihilation from the air. Survivors would later describe the shock of seeing bombers approach so low they could see faces, then watching decks erupt under streams of heavy fire. The psychological impact mattered as much as the physical destruction. The transformation of the B-25 began at the nose. The bombardier's station was removed entirely. In its place, mechanics installed heavy machine guns rigidly fixed to fire straight ahead. Early field modifications mounted 4 guns, then 6, and eventually 8 in the nose alone. Additional guns were placed in cheek mounts, turrets, and waist positions, but the defining feature was the concentration of forward fire controlled by the pilot. Installing that many guns was not as simple as bolting them in place. The nose structure had to be reinforced to absorb recoil forces generated when multiple weapons fired simultaneously. Ammunition boxes were positioned as close as possible to the guns to reduce feed problems, with flexible chutes routed to avoid jamming during violent maneuvers. Weight was redistributed by removing unused equipment and shifting internal loads so the aircraft's center of gravity remained within limits. Every modification was tested in flight, then adjusted again. The guns fired armor-piercing incendiary ammunition. At close range, these rounds punched through thin steel plating, gun shields, and bridge structures. Incendiary components ignited fuel, ammunition, and exposed equipment. With all forward guns firing together, the volume of fire was overwhelming. In a few seconds, hundreds of rounds struck a target, sweeping decks, destroying fire control positions, and killing exposed crews before they could react. The gun installation was only half the system. The attack profile completed it. Aircraft approached from medium altitude to avoid early detection, then dropped to wave-top height several miles from the target. Speed increased. At roughly 1,500 yards, the pilot opened fire. The goal was not to sink the ship with bullets alone, but to blind it. Anti-aircraft gunners were cut down, bridges were smashed, steering and communication were disrupted. Bombs followed immediately. Skip bombing required releasing a bomb at low altitude and precise speed so it would bounce across the water. When done correctly, the bomb skipped once or twice and struck the hull at or just below the waterline. Delayed fuses allowed the weapon to penetrate before detonation, maximizing flooding and structural damage. With defenses already suppressed by gunfire, ships could not maneuver or return effective fire during this final phase. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea was the first full demonstration of this method. Rear Admiral Masatomi Kimura's convoy was detected as expected, and Japanese commanders assumed they would face the familiar pattern of ineffective bombing. When the attack came, it unfolded exactly as Allied planners intended. High-altitude aircraft began their runs, drawing every gun upward. Then the low-level attackers arrived. Modified B-25s swept in at wave height, their noses aligned directly on individual ships. At close range, the effect was immediate. Heavy machine gun fire tore into bridges and gun mounts. Steel shattered. Personnel were cut down where they stood. Steering failed as helmsmen and officers were killed. Anti-aircraft fire collapsed in seconds. As the aircraft passed along the length of a ship, bombs were released. They skipped across the water and slammed into hulls already compromised by fire. Explosions tore open engine rooms and cargo holds. Flooding spread rapidly. Some ships lost power almost immediately. Others burned as fires fed on fuel and supplies. The sequence repeated across the convoy. Escorts attempting to interpose themselves became targets in turn. With bridges destroyed and rudders jammed, maneuver became impossible. Within minutes, ships were dead in the water, then sinking. The entire action lasted less than 15 minutes. When it ended, all 8 transports were destroyed or sinking, along with half the destroyer screen. Of nearly 7,000 troops aboard, fewer than 1,200 would ever reach New Guinea. The strategic effect was decisive. Japan could no longer risk daylight convoys in waters within Allied air range. Reinforcement of forward garrisons became slow, inefficient, and dangerous. Submarines and night runs could deliver only a fraction of what surface transports carried. Across New Guinea and the Solomon Islands, Japanese units began to starve and wither in place. The technical lessons spread quickly. Field modifications were standardized. Factories reinforced structures and incorporated solid noses into later production. Entire groups converted to low-level attack. The concept of combining concentrated forward fire with low-altitude bombing reshaped air operations across the theater. By late 1943, Japanese commanders reported that daylight movement of anything larger than a fishing boat had become suicidal. The 8-gun nose of the B25 was not a miracle of science. It was an act of adaptation. A stable airframe was chosen because it could carry weight, absorb recoil, and fly low without losing control. Guns were installed because they solved a specific problem at a specific range. Tactics evolved because old ones failed. On March 3, 1943, those choices converged over the Bismarck Sea. In minutes, a convoy was destroyed not by overwhelming fleets, but by a handful of aircraft flown differently and armed differently. The lesson was simple and enduring. In war, the side that adapts fastest and is willing to change how its tools are used often decides the outcome.